Learn English easy.
Kind of diplomacy we're about to talk about. Maybe we all need a refresher on how to communicate.
Yeah, or at least how not to start an international incident over Twitter.
Exactly.
Fair point. It is Sunday, January 18th, 2026. And if you're listening to this, well, congratulations on making it through the first couple of weeks of the year. I was looking at our rundown for today. We're going from the Arctic to the Himalayas, and I realized I should have worn a sweater.
It is definitely a cold tour today, both literally and metaphorically, though I'd say the geopolitical temperature is running pretty hot in all those places.
Well, while most of the country was glued to the football playoffs last night, and don't worry, I won't spoil the scores for anyone catching up, I've got a sneaking suspicion you were up to something a little less fun.
Let's just say my Saturday night was a thrilling dive into the econometrics of tariff impacts.
You suffer through the foreign policy journals so the rest of us can watch the game in peace.
It's a tough job, but someone's got to track the global welfare losses.
And we appreciate your sacrifice. But let's get into the mission for this deep dive. We're looking at a world map that really feels like it's being redrawn with a Sharpie in real time. Yeah. I mean, from the ice sheets of Greenland to the streets of Tehran and all the way over to the Indian border, if you feel like the last 2 weeks have been a nonstop blur of breaking news banners, you are not crazy.
It's frantic. And we're not just seeing the status quo shift, we're seeing the very boundaries of what's considered acceptable in international relations just get hammered. Things that used to be theoretical worst-case scenarios are now actual, White House policy.
So here's the roadmap for today. First up, the escalating Greenland crisis. It honestly sounds like a bad joke from 7 years ago. But the president is threatening our closest allies with economic warfare because they won't sell us an island. Then we're going to look at the actual price tag for all of this, the economic data on the current trade war. After that, we're heading to the Middle East, where the shadow of 1979 is looming large over Iran.
Yeah, that's a powder keg.
And finally, we're going to look at a silent front in the Himalayas that China is quietly exploiting while everyone else is looking the other way.
It's a packed itinerary, and I think the connections between these stories are, frankly, more terrifying than any one of them on its own.
Okay, so let's start with the big icy elephant in the room, Greenland.
The loud story. You can't miss this one.
Oh, it is the loudest. I mean, if you told me 5-6 years ago that the entire Western alliance would be on the brink of collapse over a real estate deal, I would have laughed you out of the room.
Right.
But here we are. It's January 2026. President Trump has announced tariffs on 8 NATO allies. We're talking Denmark, the UK, France, Germany, the whole crew, all because Copenhagen said no.
And I think it's really important we don't just frame this as, Trump being Trump or some quirky real estate obsession. What we're actually seeing, based on all the diplomatic and intelligence chatter, is a textbook example of hybrid warfare.
Hybrid warfare. I mean, that's a term we usually hear applied to, like Russia or non-state actors. You're saying the U.S. is using it against its own allies.
If you look at the tactics, absolutely.
But then came the legislative pressure. The Red, White, and Blue Land bill.
I still can't say that with a straight face.
Me neither. Red, White, and Blue Land. It was introduced by Representative Buddy Carter. It sounds like a proposal for a new Six Flags, not a sovereign territory.
The name is completely absurd, but the signal was deadly serious. It sent a message to Copenhagen. The legislative machinery in Washington is greased. We are already planning how to integrate this territory. It starts to normalize the idea of annexation in the American public's mind. It makes the unthinkable seem bureaucratic.
But the real turning point, the moment it stopped being funny and started getting really scary, was March 2025, Vice President J.D. Vance's trip.
That was a breach of protocol that you almost never see between close allies. He went to the Pacific Space Base, what we used to call Thule Air Base, uninvited.
Yeah, uninvited.
Uninvited. Now, just stop and think about that. The Vice President of the United States landing on a military base in a foreign country without an invitation from that country's government.
That alone is an incredible insult.
It's way more than an insult. It's a direct challenge to their sovereignty. And then he stands on Danish-administered soil and gives a speech criticizing Denmark for failing the people of Greenland. That is political warfare, plain and simple. He was actively trying to drive a wedge between the local government in Nuuk and the national government in Copenhagen.
And it had immediate consequences. That
Yeah.
base commander, Susanna Myers.
A career military officer. She was put in a completely impossible position. She did what any good commander would do. She tried to smooth things over with the locals and the Danish officials, saying the aggressive rhetoric from Washington didn't reflect the views of the personnel on the base.
She was just trying to do her job and keep the peace.
Of course. And she was fired for it.
Just like that.
Summarily fired by Trump, citing the chain of command. That sent a chilling message to the entire U.S. military and diplomatic corps. You're either on board with this or you're out. It politicized the U.S. military presence in the Arctic in a way we've, frankly, never seen before.
Okay, so fast forward to just last month, December 2025. We get a special envoy to Greenland, Jeff Landry. Is that even a real diplomatic position?
Legally, not really. I mean, Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. You send an envoy to Denmark. Sending one directly to Greenland is, in diplomatic terms, a calculated insult. It's treating them as if they're already independent. It's an act of delegitimizing Denmark's authority.
And Landry didn't exactly come in with a soft touch.
Not at all. He threatened to basically crash a traditional dog sled race uninvited.
Which is just, I mean, can you imagine a foreign diplomat threatening to just show up unannounced at the Super Bowl? It's bizarre.
It is bizarre, but it's deliberately disruptive. Denmark, of course, refused to recognize his role, and it just spiraled into this ugly diplomatic standoff.
Which brings us to today. The language has gotten so much darker. We're not asking anymore. We heard Stephen Miller, the deputy chief of staff, come out right after the Venezuela strikes, which we'll get to, and basically assert right to take Greenland.
And then came the map.
The map. Katie Miller's post. Greenland. Just covered in a U.S. flag with the caption, soon.
That went viral across Europe in minutes.
I bet.
It was seen as a direct, unambiguous threat of annexation. And that is the context for these new tariffs. This isn't just a trade dispute. It's an ultimatum from the president. Sell us the island or we will systematically destroy your economy. 10% tariffs on February 1st, escalating to 25% on June 1st.
This is the part I just can't get my head around. 25% tariffs on the engines of the European economy. Germany, France, the UK. That's an economic nuclear bomb. Why? Why risk blowing up our most important alliance for an island of 56,000 people?
Because it was never about the 56,000 people. It's about the next 100 years of global dominance. As the Arctic ice melts, new shipping lanes are opening up. Whoever controls Greenland effectively controls the North Atlantic and the shortest route between Asia and Europe. It's the strategic cork in the bottle of the Arctic.
So it's all about location, location, location.
Exactly. And that's before you even get to the resources under the ice. Greenland has one of the world's largest untapped reserves of rare earth minerals. We're talking neodymium, praseodymium, terbium.
The stuff we need for literally everything. iPhones, F-35s, electric car batteries.
Everything. And right now, China has a stranglehold on that supply chain. The logic inside the White House is brutally simple. We are the superpower. We need this strategic asset to compete with China for the next century. We are going to take it one way or another.
How are the Europeans actually handling this? I saw Greenland's Prime Minister, Newt Egede, was pretty blunt. He just said, we don't want to be Americans.
He's fighting for his culture. He knows that if Greenland just becomes another U.S. territory, their unique Inuit identity could be completely swallowed up. But the European response, that's the real shocker here. It's called Operation Arctic Endurance.
Right, this is the military twist.
It is. You have European troops, French, German, British, even Finnish deploying to Greenland as we speak. Now, officially, it's for a NATO exercise to demonstrate unity.
But unity against whom?
And that's the insane irony of it all. They're deploying to a NATO member's territory to protect it from the leader of NATO. It creates a paradox that the alliance has never, ever had to face before. A situation where allies are literally shielding another member from the United States.
And these reports of a shoot-back policy, are those real?
They've been confirmed. The Danish government has publicly stated that its soldiers on Greenland have orders to defend Danish sovereignty. If American forces were to, say, attempt a forced entry or a seizure of government buildings, the Danes are authorized to fire.
That is just terrifying.
Yeah.
The thought of two NATO armies staring each other down on the ice. These are allies who fought side by side in Afghanistan and Iraq, now potentially pointing rifles at each other and nuke.
It's brinkmanship of the highest order, and it shows you just how far the trust has eroded. The Europeans clearly believe that Trump might actually try a military move or at least a forceful seizure of key assets. They're taking the threat that seriously.
Okay, so while soldiers are freezing in the Arctic, the rest of us are about to feel the heat in our wallets. All this buying islands rhetoric isn't free. This brings us to the money.
The economic reality check.
You mentioned that paper you were ruining your Saturday night with, Making America Great Again, the economic impacts of Liberation Day tariffs.
That's the one, by Lash Karapour and his colleagues. It's a deep analysis of the Liberation Day tariffs that Trump enacted back in April of 2025.
Right. Remind us what Liberation Day was all about.
That was the big one. A baseline 10% tariff slapped on almost all imports, sold to the public as a way to revive American industry and punish our trade partners. So we now have about 9 months of data and modeling to see how that's actually played out.
And what's the verdict from the economists?
It's pretty stark, and not in the way the administration was hoping. The model predicts a specific welfare loss for the United States of about 0.36%.
Now, hold on. 0.36% sounds like a rounding error. Why should anyone care about less than 0.5%?
Because in a $28 trillion economy, 0.36% is roughly $100 billion.
Wow.
That's $100 billion of economic value that just evaporated, its efficiency leaving the system. It represents real wealth that just ceases to exist because the economy is being forced to operate less efficiently.
Okay, that puts it in a much clearer perspective. But the number that's going to hit people at home is prices.
Absolutely. The model shows consumer prices in the U.S. rising by roughly 7.5% because of these tariffs.
7.5%.
Yeah.
On top of the inflation we've already been dealing with for the last few years. That's brutal. That's felt in everything. Milk, gas, cars, clothes.
It is a direct tax on consumption. I mean, tariffs are taxes, and they're paid by the importer, who almost always passes that cost directly on to you, the consumer. So when you buy that new toaster or that pair of sneakers, you are paying that tax.
But here's the argument that Trump supporters always make. The trade deficit, that's his big target. Does it go down?
And the paper confirms that it does. The trade deficit shrinks by a significant amount, somewhere between 26 and 29%.
So he achieves his stated goal. The deficit shrinks.
Right.
Victory lap, right?
Well, in a purely accounting sense, yes. But this is where that wonky term endogenous deficit comes in. And it's really crucial to understanding why this is a hollow victory.
Oh, okay. Break it down for us. No equations. Plain English.
All right. Think of international trade not just as, a box of stuff moving on a ship. Think of it as a whole web of relationships.
Okay.
When an American company buys or sells things abroad, they're also paying for all sorts of services: logistics, marketing, local labor, fixed costs in that other country. They set up offices, they hire local managers, they build distribution networks. All of these services are embedded in the trade itself.
So there's a whole infrastructure built around that box on the boat.
Exactly. And what the paper argues is that you can't just tax the goods in the box without destroying that whole web of service relationships. When you smash the trade volume with tariffs just to fix the deficit number, you're also destroying all those efficient service jobs and networks that were attached to it. You're not just trimming fat, you're cutting away healthy muscle.
So we get a smaller deficit, but we're left with a smaller, weaker, less efficient economy.
That's the trade-off. It's like deciding to lose weight by cutting off your leg. Yes, the number on the scale goes down. You are technically lighter. But are you healthier? Can you run faster? Of course not. You've essentially maimed yourself to hit an arbitrary target number.
That is a very vivid image, and probably not the weight loss plan anyone is signing up for.
And it gets even worse because this model doesn't even fully account for retaliation. It's a negative-sum game. The EU is already drawing up its list of countermeasures for these Greenland tariffs. They're going to target U.S. bourbon, Harley-Davidson motorcycles, American agriculture.
So they hit us where it hurts.
Of course. And when they hit back, any tiny competitive gain the U.S. might have squeezed out is completely erased. We both just end up poorer.
So bringing it back to today, if these new 25% tariffs on Europe actually kick in next month, on top of the Liberation Day tariffs we already have, we are basically doubling down on a strategy that is already costing us 7.5% in higher prices.
That's essentially it. We're choosing to fracture our most important alliance while making our own citizens poorer, all in pursuit of a territorial ambition that the locals don't even want. The economic logic here is purely punitive. It's not about growth anymore. It's about inflicting enough pain to get political concessions.
Well, it's thoroughly depressing. But at least Europe is, despite the shouting, relatively stable. The Middle East, on the other hand,
is an absolute powder keg. It's on fire.
We have to talk about Iran. This latest wave of protests started on December 28th, right?
Yeah, just after Christmas. And it began as economic protests. The Iranian currency, the rial, completely collapsed against the dollar. People couldn't afford bread. They couldn't get medicine. But in Iran, economic grief has a way of turning into political rage very, very quickly. It morphed into chants of death to the dictator.
The casualty numbers I'm seeing are all over the place. I've seen reports of 2,000 killed, some as high as 12,000.
And that's because of the information blackout. The regime has essentially just killed the internet. They're trying to suffocate this uprising in the dark using live ammunition, tear gas, indiscriminate firing into crowds.
Now, we've seen major protests in Iran before. I'm thinking of 2009, the Green Movement, and then again in 2022 after the death of Mahsa Amini. Why does this one feel different? Why does the regime seem so much more panicked this time?
I think it's because of the external factor. It's because of the United States. And specifically, it's because of what happened just 2 weeks ago in Venezuela.
This is the context that I think is getting lost in the day-to-day news cycle. January 3rd, 2026. The U.S. intervened in Venezuela.
Intervened is a very polite word for it. It was a rapid, targeted special forces operation. They went in, they deposed Nicolas Maduro, and they flew him to a federal holding cell in New York.
A literal regime change operation. They just plucked a head of state out of his palace and put him in American custody.
It was stunningly fast, successful, and shocking to the world. So now, when President Trump tweets at the Iranian mullahs, hell OP is on its way, and we are locked and loaded, they're not just hearing bluster. They are looking at live footage of Maduro in handcuffs and thinking, he might actually do it. He might actually come for us.
It changes the entire calculus. The madman isn't bluffing anymore.
It creates a genuine existential fear in Tehran, and the military movements are backing that up. The US and the UK have been quietly drawing down their non-essential personnel from Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar.
Explain the significance of that for people who don't follow military logistics. Al Udeid is the massive forward operating base for the region, right?
Yeah.
It's the nerve center. And you only pull your non-essential staff out if you expect incoming fire. You're clearing the decks before a fight. It signals that the U.S. is preparing for an Iranian retaliation, which strongly implies the U.S. is planning the initial attack.
But then, just a few days ago, was it January 14th and 15th, Trump seemed to pull back. He said he'd received assurances that the killing of protesters had stopped. He even claimed credit for saving lives.
It's the madman theory in action. You create maximum unpredictability. You threaten extreme, overwhelming violence. You make them believe you are just crazy enough to do it. And then you pull back at the last second and claim a diplomatic victory.
Is it a coherent strategy or is it just chaos?
That is the billion-dollar question. The Council on Foreign Relations had a really sharp analysis of this from Michael Froman. He called it the intervention trap.
What's the trap?
It's the terrible dilemma the U.S. always faces in these situations. If the U.S. intervenes too publicly or strikes too hard, the regime immediately paints the protesters as American puppets, as foreign agents. It completely kills the legitimacy of the popular movement. It allows the regime to rally nationalist support. It's what happened in 1953 with Mossadegh, and it's what happened in 2009.
But if you just stay silent and do nothing,
then you watch a massacre unfold on live television. You let thousands of innocent people die while you stand by and do nothing. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Froman brought up a fascinating historical parallel that I hadn't really thought about in this context. Tiananmen versus Timisoara.
It is a brilliant and terrifying comparison.
Break that down for us. What's the analogy?
Right, so Tiananmen Square, China, 1989. The Chinese Communist Party cracks down on student protesters with brutal, overwhelming force. Tanks in the streets. The world watches in horror, condemns it, but ultimately does nothing. The regime survives, reestablishes control through fear, and the Communist Party is still in power today.
The crackdown worked.
It worked. Now contrast that with Timisoara.
In Romania, right.
Romania, same year, 1989. The dictator Ceausescu's security forces fire on protesters in the city of Timisoara. But instead of instilling fear, the bloodshed triggers absolute, uncontrollable rage across the entire country. The population explodes. The regular army looks at the size of the crowds and realizes the tide has turned. They switch sides. And Ceausescu's regime collapses within days.
So the question for Iran right now is, are we watching a Tiananmen or are we watching a Timisoara?
Precisely. Is the regime's crackdown going to instill fear and crush the movement? Or is it going to be the spark that fuels the fire and brings the whole system down? With the economic collapse being so severe this time, and with figures like Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi re-emerging, the regime is probably more fragile than it looks.
Right. Pahlavi represents a memory of a different pre-1979 Iran. His actual support is debatable, but his very presence adds another layer of pressure.
It absolutely does. And all the while, you have Trump playing this high-stakes, poker game-threatening military action on one hand, and on the other, threatening tariffs on anyone who does business with Iran, trying to strangle the regime economically.
It's a maximum pressure campaign on steroids.
And unlike in previous years, the U.S. has now proven in Venezuela that it is willing and able to use direct force for regime change. That makes this a very, very dangerous and unpredictable moment. A single miscalculation on either side could spark a massive regional war.
It just feels like the entire global chessboard is lit up. The Arctic, Europe, the Middle East. But there's one spot that is strangely quiet, at least in the Western press. A spot where the map is changing without any tweets or dramatic press conferences.
The silent front.
The Himalayas. Business Today dropped a report about a new road being built. Now, why on earth should we care about a road in the middle of nowhere?
Because of where that nowhere is. We're talking about the Agil Pass. Elevation 4,805 meters.
That's oxygen mask territory.
Absolutely. The Chinese have just completed a road that brings their construction teams, and more importantly, their military patrols, down into the lower Shiksam Valley. Now, this puts them within very close striking distance, maybe 50 kilometers, of the Siachen Glacier.
Okay, for listeners who don't have a tactical map of Kashmir on their wall, which I'm guessing is most of us, why is the Siachen Glacier so important?
It's known as the world's highest battlefield. It is the strategic high ground that India has held at great human and financial cost for decades. It overlooks the entire region. It's the ultimate vantage point. If China can compromise India's hold on Siachen, they can fundamentally compromise India's defense against Pakistan.
Because Pakistan is right there on the other side.
Exactly. It creates a potential pincer movement, China encroaching from one side, Pakistan on the other, squeezing India in the middle.
And this tactic, you called it salami slicing.
Salami slicing. It's a term strategists use all the time to describe China's border behavior. You don't launch a massive invasion with 100,000 troops. You don't declare war. You just take a slice. You build a new road. You set up a civilian village in disputed territory. You move a border post 500 meters forward.
And if the other side reacts with force, they look like the aggressor over what seems like a tiny, insignificant issue.
Precisely. None of these individual acts are worth starting World War III over. You're not going to launch nuclear weapons because of a road construction crew. But if you do that 10 times over 10 years, you look up one day and realize the entire strategic reality has changed. You've lost critical territory without a single major shot being fired.
And the timing of this. Why finish this road right now?
The timing is impeccable. Just look at Washington's focus. We are obsessed with buying Greenland. We are fighting a trade war with our European allies. We are managing a fresh regime change in Venezuela and a revolutionary crisis in Iran. We are stretched incredibly thin. Our attention bandwidth is completely maxed out.
So Beijing sees that the global policeman has his hands full elsewhere.
Absolutely. They see the chaos and they exploit it. While the U.S. is being loud and chaotic, they are being quiet and methodical. The message is, you go ahead and argue about the island, we're going to go build the road. And it forces India into a two-front threat scenario, which is an absolute nightmare for military planners in New Delhi. They're forced to split their resources and attention.
It really highlights the stunning contrast in styles, doesn't it? The U.S. is operating on this very transactional, loud, aggressive model. I want this, give it to me or else. And China is operating on this model of infrastructure, patience, and gradualism.
And both approaches are systematically eroding the old rules of the game. They're just coming at it from completely different directions.
That really feels like the thread connecting all these disparate stories, doesn't it? We've covered a lot of ground today. Greenland, the economy, Iran, the Himalayas. When you pull the camera back and look at the whole board, what are we actually seeing?
We are seeing the rapid erosion or maybe the deliberate demolition of the rules-based order. You hear that term a lot in foreign policy circles. It's this post-World War II idea that international relations should be governed by laws, treaties, and shared norms. You don't just take land by force. You don't just kidnap other leaders.
And you think that era is ending?
It certainly feels like it's on life support. The Chinese foreign minister, Wang Yi, actually used a phrase recently.
The law of the jungle.
That's it. He said that China opposes a return to the law of the jungle. But in reality, their actions in the Himalayas and our actions regarding Greenland suggest that's exactly where we're all heading. A world of might makes right.
If you have the raw power to take something, you take it. If you have the economic leverage to crush an ally into submission, you use it.
It's becoming a global free-for-all. And that forces every medium-sized power on the planet, from the UK to India to Saudi Arabia, to completely rethink their security. You can no longer rely on the old treaties. You can't rely on the goodwill of the superpowers. You need your own leverage. You need to be able to shoot back.
Which brings us to the really uncomfortable question. We always like to leave our listeners with something to chew on, something that might keep them up at night.
Right. We sit here and we analyze all the risks. We call it chaos. We call it instability. We criticize the tariffs and the threats as being reckless. But just for a moment, look at the scoreboard from the administration's point of view.
Go on.
Nicolas Maduro is sitting in a federal cell in New York. The Iranian regime is shaking in its boots. The U.S. trade deficit is down by almost 30%. The provocative question is this: what if this chaotic, aggressive, madman strategy actually works?
That is a very scary thought for anyone who believes in the traditional way of doing things.
It is. Because if it works, if Trump gets major concessions on Greenland, or if the mullahs in Tehran actually fall and a pro-Western government rises in their place, it validates the chaos. It proves that the old rules-based order was just holding America back. It proves that being the bully works.
And what's the long-term cost of that validation? What's the price we pay for that?
The cost is that we normalize a world where national sovereignty is for sale or for the taking. We might get the island, we might win this specific trade war this quarter, but the interest payments on that kind of global anarchy, we'll be paying them for decades to come. We are teaching the entire world that the only thing that really matters is raw, naked power, and eventually someone else might have more of it than we do.
Sovereignty as a suggestion, not a rule. That is definitely something to chew on.
It is. It's a brave new world, and it's not necessarily a safer one.
Well, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you for diving deep with us. We know it's a lot to process, but that's why we're here. The map looks a little different than it did when you woke up this morning.
Keep asking the hard questions.
Listen.
And don't let the noise drown out the signal.
Absolutely. Keep digging deep. We'll catch you on the next one.